owe this family $14,000. Or get out. The whole table went quiet except for my sister laughing while she posted my humiliation online before dinner was even over. My father sat there smiling like destroying his own daughter was something to celebrate. And for 1 second, I thought this had to be some kind of sick joke. Then I looked down at the invoice in my hands and realized it had been printed 2 weeks before I ever moved back in. That was the moment I understood something that changed the way I saw my family forever. This wasn't anger. This wasn't frustration. They had planned this. And the truth is, that dinner was only the beginning of everything that would tear my family apart. My name is Heather Dawson. I was 29 when my father slapped a stapled invoice onto the dinner table like he was serving a legal notice instead of meatloaf. "You owe this family $14,000, he said, tapping the paper with 2 fingers. "Back rent, and you'll pay every cent or you're out." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. Then my mother lifted her wine glass like this was normal and said, "We're charging interest too, 13% a month, like a real landlord." My sister laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. "Heather's credit score is about to die," she said, already typing something, probably posting my humiliation before dinner was even cold. Then my father slid over another page. A payment schedule, late fees, penalties, due dates. He had made a whole spreadsheet to collect money from his own daughter. And standing there, watching my family stare at me like I was some stranger they couldn't wait to punish. I felt something in me go cold. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was planned. I stared down at the paperwork, still trying to understand how a father reaches the point where he prints invoices for his own child. And that was when I noticed it. Tiny print at the bottom corner of the page. A timestamp from a local copy shop. The invoice had been printed 14 days earlier. 14 days. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor shifted beneath me. Because 14 days earlier, I had not even moved back in yet. My boxes were still in storage. My clothes were still in my apartment. I had not slept one night under that roof, which meant this wasn't some emotional outburst. This wasn't my father losing his temper because he was frustrated or stressed or fed up. No, they had planned this, every second of it. They had sat together at that same kitchen table, talked it through, picked a number, typed it up, printed copies, and waited. Waited for me to come home so they could ambush me like I was some criminal walking into an interrogation. And suddenly, everything in that room looked different. My Uncle Gary sitting there like a witness to my humiliation. My sister with her phone half hidden pointed just enough in my direction to record my reaction. My mother sipping wine like she was watching television. Even the way my father stood. Too calm, too prepared, too proud of himself. It hit me all at once. This dinner had never been dinner. It was theater. And I was the only one who didn't know the script. Have you ever had that moment where you realize the people smiling at you aren't smiling because they love you? They're smiling because they think they finally have you cornered? That's what it felt like. Like I had walked into my own home and somehow become the outsider in the room. I looked back down at the paper and saw the ridiculous charges again. Emotional strain surcharge, inconvenience fee, late adjustment penalty. He had literally invented charges just to make the number bigger. And somehow, that hurt even more than the money. Because fake charges meant effort, creativity, thought. He had taken time to sit down and think of ways to make me feel smaller, to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like a burden for needing help during a difficult season of my life. My mother leaned forward then, with that cold look she always got when she wanted cruelty to sound reasonable. "Do you know how much stress you've caused this family?" she asked. My sister snorted. Honestly, she should be grateful Dad didn't charge by the month. Then I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. A private story post. Already uploaded. Captioned, "Freeloader moved back home." LOL. That hurt more than I want to admit. Not because of strangers. Because there is something rotten about watching your own sister turn your pain into entertainment. And in that exact moment, something inside me changed. The hurt was still there. The shock was still there. But underneath it, something colder started forming. Because I realized I was not sitting at a family dinner. I was sitting in a room full of people who had rehearsed my humiliation before I ever walked through the door. And once you understand that, once you realize betrayal wasn't accidental but intentional, you stop trying to fix things. You start seeing people for exactly who they are. And the hardest part was, they were acting like I had done nothing for them. Like I was some burden who had drifted back home with empty hands and no sense of responsibility. But standing there in that kitchen, holding that ridiculous invoice, all I could think about was everything I had already given them. When I was 16, my father's contracting business nearly collapsed. 2 bad jobs, 1 lawsuit, and my parents were weeks away from missing the mortgage. Nobody asked me for help. They didn't have to. I saw the panic on my mother's face. I heard the late-night arguments through my bedroom wall. I knew exactly how bad it was. So I sold my laptop, the one I needed for school. I sold the camera I had saved for 2 summers to buy. And I handed every dollar to my mother in the parking lot of a grocery store. Because she said Dad's pride couldn't handle seeing where the money came from. I told my friends the stuff had been stolen. I lied for them to protect his ego. Years later, when property taxes were behind and they were panicking again, I sent money. When the furnace died in winter and my mother called crying, I put the repair on my own credit card. When things got tight during the pandemic slowdown, I emptied part of my savings to help keep their mortgage current. And every single time they promised the same thing. We'll pay you back. We'll never forget this. We appreciate everything. But standing in that kitchen, watching them smirk while demanding money from me, I realized something painful. They hadn't forgotten. They remembered perfectly. They just never counted what I gave because, in their minds, what was mine had always belonged to them anyway. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. Not that they took from me, but that after everything I sacrificed, they still looked at me like I had never done enough. Like I was still somehow the selfish one. And when that realization hit me, I stopped feeling hurt. I started feeling tired. The kind of tired that comes when you finally understand you could give some people your whole life, and they would still ask why you didn't give more. And once I understood that, I knew I could not stay there another second. I set the invoice down slowly, looked at every face around that table, and for the first time in my life, I stopped searching for love in people who were enjoying my pain. I stood up. My father frowned immediately. "Sit down," he snapped. "We're not finished." I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said. "You are." Then I turned and walked upstairs to the bedroom that used to be mine. And even up there, the humiliation kept going. Most of my old things were gone. Shelves emptied, photos missing. Keepsakes boxed away like I had already been erased from the house. But the part that stopped me cold was the family portrait hanging in the upstairs hallway. Someone had taken a dry erase marker and drawn a red X straight across my face. Not permanent, just enough to wipe away later if they wanted to pretend it was a joke. But cruelty doesn't stop being cruelty just because it can be erased. I stared at that picture for what felt like forever, and something inside me hardened. Because that red X told me more than the fake invoice ever could. It told me they had already decided who I was in this family. And it was not daughter. It was burden, problem, target. I packed one duffel bag, grabbed what little was left of mine, and walked downstairs without another word. My father moved toward the front door. "Where do you think you're going?" "Out." My mother crossed her arms. "If you leave tonight, don't expect to come back." That almost made me laugh, because what exactly was I coming back to? A home? No. Homes don't humiliate you for sport. Homes don't prepare ambushes. Homes don't mark your face out of family pictures like they're rehearsing life without you. So I left. I slept in my car that night in the parking lot of a grocery store off the interstate. 39 degrees outside. Seat pushed back as far as it would go. Coat wrapped around me like somehow fabric could soften betrayal. And I just sat there staring through the windshield, asking myself one question over and over again. How did it get this bad? How had I spent years bleeding for people who would laugh while cutting me open? The next morning, I used hotel points I had been saving for a vacation I never took and checked into an extended stay place near downtown. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, stale coffee, and enough quiet to hear myself think. And by that afternoon, I made one call. To Megan Foster, my oldest friend. The one person who had known me long enough to remember who I was before my family convinced me I was always the problem. We met that night at a 24-hour diner off Route 41. Sticky menus, burnt coffee, fluorescent lights so harsh they made everybody look tired. I told her everything. The invoice, the fake fees, the timestamp, Kayla recording me, the red X on the picture. I expected sympathy. What I got instead was clarity. Megan sat back in the booth and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that changed the way I saw everything. "They didn't snap, Heather." I frowned. What? They didn't lose control. They staged it. And just like that, the whole situation looked different. Because she was right. This wasn't family frustration. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. It was strategy. A power play. A calculated move by people who believed they could pressure me into carrying their weight because I always had before. Megan leaned forward. "Stop treating this like hurt feelings," she said. "This is manipulation. And if you keep responding emotionally, they'll keep controlling the narrative." I stared at her. "So what do I do?" She slid a napkin across the table. "Write down every time you ever helped them. Every time, every loan, every favor, every sacrifice, every promise they made and never kept." At first, I just stared at the napkin. Then I picked up the pen. And once I started writing, I couldn't stop. The laptop I sold at 16. The camera. The property tax payment I covered 4 years earlier. The furnace repair. The utility bills I quietly paid when Dad's business slowed down. The emergency transfer during COVID when they swore they were behind on the mortgage. The groceries I bought. The gas money I handed over. The birthdays and holidays where I paid extra because money was tight. Line after line after line. And with every word I wrote, my chest tightened. Because the more I listed, the clearer it became. I had never been the burden in that family. I had been the backup plan. The reserve tank. The silent safety net they drained every time their pride got them into trouble. And the worst part? They had convinced me that helping them was what good daughters did. That sacrifice meant love. That being needed meant being valued. But Megan looked at the page, then looked back at me and asked quietly, "How much do they actually owe you?" I went through my banking app. Old receipts, archived emails, text threads. And when I totaled everything I could prove, the number made my stomach turn. Just over $18,000. More than the fake debt they had tried to put on me. I laughed, but it came out bitter. Megan raised an eyebrow. "Well," she said, "isn't that interesting?" And for the first time since that dinner, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because suddenly, I understood something I should have realized years earlier. My family's biggest mistake was thinking I would keep loving them the same way after they showed me what I really meant to them. That night, I went back to my hotel room, opened my laptop, and started gathering everything. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, old screenshots, text messages, emails, promises, receipts, proof. Because if they wanted paperwork... Fine, I was done coming to that table empty-handed. And once I had the proof in front of me, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I did not call them to argue. I did not text paragraphs. I did not beg for apologies. I sent my father one message. "Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, kitchen table. Have everybody there." He replied less than a minute later. "Good. Bring your first payment." I stared at that text and actually laughed. Because even after everything, he still thought I was coming back to surrender. He still thought he controlled the meeting. That next night, I walked into that house wearing my work clothes. Navy slacks, white blouse, badge clipped at my waist. I wanted them to see me exactly as I was. Not broken, not ashamed, not defeated. My father was already seated at the head of the table like some self-appointed judge. My mother sat beside him, Kayla across from them, scrolling on her phone with that smug little expression people wear when they think they are about to watch someone else apologize. And Uncle Gary, of course, was there too, because apparently my humiliation still required an audience. The second I stepped inside, my father held out his hand. "Envelope?" he asked. I set a thick folder on the table instead. Not exactly. His smile faded. "What is this?" I sat down slowly. "Documentation?" And for the next 10 minutes, nobody spoke except me. I opened that folder and started laying papers across the table one by one. Bank transfer receipts, screenshots, invoices, payment confirmations, text messages, dates, amounts. Every single dollar I had ever put into that house, every time I bailed them out. Every emergency I covered, every promise they made to pay me back. I showed them the property tax payment, the furnace repair, the utility catch-up bills, the emergency mortgage transfer during the pandemic. Then I slid one final page into the center of the table. A spreadsheet. My spreadsheet. Every contribution listed neatly. Every date documented. Every amount totaled. At the bottom, $18,250. Silence. Real silence. The kind that falls when people realize the person they thought was weak came prepared. My mother was the first to pale. Kayla stopped smirking. Uncle Gary suddenly looked fascinated by the salt shaker. But my father did what men like him always do when they lose control. He reached for anger. "This is manipulative," he snapped. I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said calmly. What was manipulative was printing a fake debt before I even moved back in. That hit him immediately. His eyes dropped, just for a second, to the corner of his own invoice. The timestamp. The proof he never thought I would notice. And suddenly, nobody in that room looked nearly as confident. "You want to talk about money?" I asked. "Fine, let's talk numbers." I leaned forward. "But before you collect $1 from me, I want every person at this table to acknowledge the truth." Then I slid 2 typed documents across the wood. Megan had helped me draft them. Simple, professional, clean. Nothing emotional, just facts. A statement confirming that I had financially supported the household multiple times over several years. A statement acknowledging that the $14,000 rent demand had no lease basis, no written agreement, and no legal standing. My father let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced. "You think you're going to embarrass us with paperwork?" I smiled slightly. "No," I said. "I think I'm done being the only one in this family expected to swallow embarrassment quietly." Kayla muttered under her breath. "This is insane." I turned toward her. "You posted about me, right?" Her face changed instantly. "So go ahead," I said. "Post this too." Nobody moved, nobody spoke, because suddenly the joke was not funny anymore. Suddenly there was no performance left. No fake authority, no smug little comments, just truth. Raw and ugly, sitting in the middle of the table where everyone could see it. My mother finally reached for the pen first. Her hands were shaking. She signed. Not because she was sorry, because shame had finally entered the room, and she wanted it over. My father signed next, jaw tight, eyes cold. He signed because refusing would only confirm what he already knew, that I had beaten him with facts he could not argue away. Then Kayla signed. Then Uncle Gary. I gathered the papers carefully, placed them back into my folder, and stood up. Uncle Gary cleared his throat. So, what happens now? I looked around that table one last time, at every face that had once made me question my own worth. And I answered honestly. Now, you live with what you tried to do. Then I turned for the door. And behind me, for the first time in my life, nobody tried to stop me. And if the story had ended there, that would have been enough. Enough pain, enough truth, enough humiliation for one family to choke on for a lifetime. But life has a strange way of testing whether people really mean the boundaries they set. Exactly 1 week later, my phone exploded at 1:30 in the morning. The first call came from Kayla. I ignored it. Then another. Then another. Then 3 texts in a row. Answer me. Mom is freaking out. Please pick up. My stomach tightened immediately. Because no matter how angry you are, when your phone rings like that in the middle of the night, your mind goes to the worst place first. Death? Hospital? Accident? I called her back. She answered on the first ring, breathing hard, panicked. "Where are you?" she asked. "What happened?" "There's mail, something legal. Dad's freaking out, Mom's crying. Please just come over." I did not rush. I drove carefully, slowly, letting them wait. Because for once, their emergency did not automatically become mine. When I got there, they were not at the house. They were at Uncle Gary's place. Apparently, the people who had been so proud and smug a week earlier could no longer stand to panic alone. The second I walked in, the entire room felt different. No one looked confident. No one looked smug. No one had a joke ready. My mother's mascara was streaked down her face. Kayla looked pale. Even Uncle Gary, the man who always seemed to have something self-righteous to say, was dead quiet. And my father. My father looked older than he had 7 days before. There was an open envelope on the coffee table. Certified mail. My father pointed at it. Read it. I picked it up and started scanning the pages. And the further I read, the colder I got. Mortgage delinquency, failure to cure default, accelerated foreclosure timeline, escrow deficiency, county tax notice. My eyes lifted slowly. "You're behind on the mortgage?" Nobody answered. I looked back down, not behind, months behind. I stared at my father. "You were about to lose the house?" My mother burst into tears again. And in that moment, everything clicked. The fake invoice, the pressure, the sudden demand for money, the ridiculous back rent claim. It had never been about teaching me responsibility. It had never been about fairness. They were desperate. They were drowning. And instead of asking for help honestly, they tried to rob me through shame. My father stood up slowly. "We need your help," he said. I just stared at him, because I honestly could not believe the nerve it took to say those words after everything they had done. "You need my help," I repeated. He nodded once, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the truth is so outrageous, all your body can do is laugh before it breaks. My mother stepped toward me. "Heather, please." My uncle cleared his throat. "Your daddy made mistakes." "All of you made mistakes," I cut in. Kayla lowered her eyes. "Good. Let her feel it." Then my mother said something that almost made me lose my mind. "We were trying to push you to be more responsible because we knew things were bad." I stared at her. "So your plan," I said slowly, "was to extort me as some kind of life lesson?" Nobody answered, because there was no answer that didn't sound insane once spoken out loud. The room smelled like panic and stale coffee. And then my father, The same man who had barked orders at me like I was a tenant in his home looked me in the eye and said the words I never thought I would hear from him. "Tell us what to do." And there it was. Not an apology, not accountability, not regret. Just transfer of responsibility. The same thing they had always done. Create the fire, then expect me to be the one who runs in and saves everybody. Part of me wanted to walk right back out that door. Let them sit in their panic. Let them lose everything. Let consequences teach them what respect never had. But another part of me, the part that had spent my whole life being the only adult in the room, already knew I was not leaving yet. So I took a slow breath and looked at the papers again. Then I said the only thing I could say honestly. "I'll review everything." My mother reached for my hand, and I stepped back before she could touch me. "Do not confuse help with forgiveness," I said. And for the first time all night, everybody in that room understood that if I helped them now, it would not be because they deserved it. It would be because I had not decided yet how much of my heart I was still willing to lose. So I sat down with their paperwork and started doing what none of them had apparently bothered to do themselves. I went through bank statements, mortgage records, tax notices, savings accounts. And within 20 minutes, I found the detail that changed everything. There was another account, separate from their main checking, separate from the mortgage fund, separate from every bill they claimed they could not afford to pay. Balance? Just under $20,000. I looked up immediately. "What is this?" Nobody answered. I asked again, louder. "What is this?" My mother's face went pale. My father looked at the floor. And Kayla suddenly could not meet my eyes. That was all I needed to know. My chest tightened. "Tell me," I said. My mother swallowed hard. "It's Kayla's moving fund." I stared at her. "Her what?" My father finally muttered. "We were helping her get started in Charlotte." And just like that, every ounce of sympathy I still had left died in my chest. Because they had money, not enough to save the house maybe, but enough to matter, enough to help, enough to make choices. And instead of using it to protect the family, they hid it. For Kayla, the golden child, the same people who tried to extort me for $14,000 had nearly $20,000 tucked away, and still looked me in the face like I was the selfish one. That was the moment I understood. They were not desperate. They were selective. They were willing to sacrifice me to protect her. And after learning that, whatever instinct I had left to protect them completely was gone. Still, I did not walk away. Not yet. Because despite everything, I am not cruel. I could not stand there and watch the house I grew up in collapse overnight without doing something. So I made them a deal. "I'll help review everything," I said. "I'll call the lender. I'll figure out your options. But from this point on, you tell me the truth about everything. No more lies. No more hiding things. No more surprises." They all nodded so fast it almost looked pathetic. Fear has a way of making people obedient when respect never could. For the next week, I became exactly what I had always been for that family, the only responsible adult in the room. By day, I worked my actual job. By night, I sat at hotel desks and kitchen tables, sorting through their financial disaster like some unpaid crisis manager. I called the lender. I organized statements. I built timelines. I explained their mess in language the bank would actually listen to. And eventually, I got them one narrow path forward. A reinstatement agreement. Strict terms, strict deadlines. No room for error. One missed payment. One wrong form. One late submission. And foreclosure would move forward. When I explained it to them, my mother burst into tears and said, "You saved us." I looked at her calmly. "No," I said. "I bought you time." Because that was the truth. I had not rescued them. I had simply delayed the consequences they had earned. And I made one thing very clear that night. I am helping you navigate this, I said. I am not carrying this for you. My father's jaw tightened like he did not like being spoken to that way. Too bad. That version of me, the one who stayed quiet to protect his pride, was gone. I would explain what needed doing. I would organize the process. I would answer questions. But I would not lie for them. I would not beg for them. And I would not clean up their mess behind closed doors while they pretended none of this was their fault. Because helping someone does not mean destroying yourself for them. And that was something my family had never understood. For the first time in my life, I was giving support without surrendering myself. I was helping, but I was no longer saving them from the weight of their own decisions. And deep down, I think they all knew it. Because when I looked around that room, I did not see gratitude. I saw discomfort. The kind people feel when they realize the person they once controlled has learned how to stand beside them, without kneeling for them. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe fear had finally taught them something. Not humility, not gratitude, but at least caution. For a few days, everyone acted different. My mother's voice turned softer. My father stopped barking orders. Kayla suddenly smiled at me like we were sisters again. It was almost laughable. The same people who had mocked me, used me, and tried to extort me were now treating me gently because I had become useful again. Not loved, useful. And that distinction mattered more than ever. Still, I watched carefully. I explained every detail of the lender's reinstatement terms twice. Then, a third time. I told them exactly what needed to happen. Payment must be certified funds. Payment must arrive by deadline. No personal checks. No delays. No mistakes. I looked directly at my father. If you do this wrong even once, the deal dies. He rolled his eyes slightly like I was insulting him. I understand how bills work, Heather. I held his stare. Apparently not. The first payment deadline came 1 week later. That morning, I texted him a reminder. No response. That afternoon, I called. He answered, sounding irritated. I've got it handled. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. What exactly did you send? A check. My whole body froze. A what? A personal check, he snapped. It's money. Same difference. No, it absolutely was not. I had explained it 3 times, written it down twice, highlighted it in the paperwork. Certified funds only. No exceptions. No, Dad, I said sharply. It is not the same difference. You have to send certified funds, cashier's check or wire. That was the agreement. Silence, then irritation. Well, no one's going to reject money. And right there, I knew. He had learned nothing, absolutely nothing. Even with his entire life collapsing around him, he still believed rules were for other people, that somehow his confidence alone would override reality. 2 days later, the lender flagged the payment. Defective submission. Terms violated, agreement under review. I stared at the email from my office desk and just sat there. Still, because in that moment, I understood something painfully simple. I had not created a path they could not follow. They had simply failed to walk the one I gave them. That night, I drove over to the house. The second I walked in, my father was already pacing. My mother was crying. Kayla stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, like somehow defensiveness was a strategy. The second my father saw me, he exploded. You knew this was urgent. I stared at him. Yes. That's why I explained it repeatedly. You should have reminded me again, he shouted. And I actually laughed. A real laugh. Because the absurdity of it hit me all at once. The daughter you tried to extort should have mothered you harder? He glared at me but said nothing. Because what could he say? My mother stepped forward with that trembling voice she used whenever she wanted sympathy to erase accountability. "We're all under stress." "No," I cut in. "You are under consequences." Kayla slammed her hand against the counter. "This whole thing got worse because you made everything about fairness." I turned slowly toward her. She kept going. "If you had just paid Dad what he asked in the beginning, maybe none of this would have happened." And just like that, every illusion shattered, every fake apology, every soft voice, every fragile piece, gone. Because there it was, the truth. She still believed I was the problem. Even after I helped, even after I saved them time, even after I cleaned up their disaster, she still thought my refusal to be exploited was what caused this. I looked around that room, at every single one of them, and I felt something inside me finally settle. Not anger, not sadness, clarity, cold, permanent clarity. "Dad hid the mortgage crisis," I said. "Mom helped draft a fake rent invoice. Kayla mocked me and blamed me. And after I still helped you," I paused, "you are somehow blaming me for the collapse you created?" Silence. Nobody had an answer, because none existed. My father tried one final move, the oldest move in the book. "After all we've done for you?" "No," I said sharply. Then I pulled the signed statement from my bag, the acknowledgement of every dollar I had ever spent helping them. I laid it flat on the counter. That phrase expired. The room went dead quiet, because they all knew what that paper meant. It meant history could no longer be rewritten. It meant guilt could no longer erase facts. It meant emotional blackmail no longer worked. Then my phone buzzed, an email from the lender. I read it silently. "Formal acceleration steps beginning within 30 days unless immediate cure is provided." That was it. The real final warning. The last door before everything collapsed. Only I knew how close the edge really was. A few seconds later, my mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Can you fix this?" she whispered. And I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the woman who had helped create my humiliation. Who had smiled through my pain. Who had reached for me only when she needed something. Then I thought about the fake invoice. The hidden savings for Kayla. The red X on my face in the family portrait. And I gave her the most honest answer I had ever given in my life. "No," I said. "Not the way you think." Because finally, after years of carrying people who broke me every chance they got, I understood the truth. I was not watching their downfall because I failed them. I was watching it because they had failed themselves. And for the first time ever, I was done stepping between them and the consequences they had spent years earning. And once I made that decision, everything became quiet inside me. Not peaceful, just clear. There is a strange kind of calm that comes when you finally stop fighting to save people who keep choosing their own destruction. That night, I packed the last of my things out of that house for good. No speeches, no dramatic goodbye, no tears. Just boxes, silence, and the sound of a door closing behind me for what I knew would be the final time. Before I left, I stopped in the hallway one last time. The family portrait was still hanging there. Someone had wiped away the red X across my face. Too late. Some things can be erased from photographs, but never from memory. 30 days later, the sheriff's notice was nailed to the front door. I stood across the street and watched it happen. The same front porch where I used to sit as a little girl eating popsicles in the summer. The same doorway my parents once stood in waving when I left for college, now marked with legal paper and public shame. And strangely enough, I did not feel joy. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I just stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and felt the heavy weight of what happens when consequences finally arrive for people who never believed they applied to them. Then the phone calls started. My mother cried first, begging. My father followed with anger, because anger always came easier to him than shame. Kayla panicked the second reality touched her life. I ignored the first round, answered the second. My mother sobbed. Please, there has to be something else we can do. There was, I said calmly. You could have listened the first time. My father shouted that I was letting them lose everything. And I said the only honest thing left to say. No, you lost everything. I just stopped lying about who caused it. 2 days later, Kayla showed up at my office. She told the receptionist it was a family emergency. I met her in the parking garage. She was crying, real tears, panic tears, the kind people cry when consequences stop feeling theoretical. She grabbed my arm. Please help us, she whispered. I know I messed up. I know I've been awful. Please, Heather. I looked at her hand still holding my sleeve, then slowly removed it. You don't want accountability, I said. You want rescue. She started crying harder. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered her laughing at dinner, her filming me, her posting freeloader online while I stood there humiliated. No. Pity is dangerous when given to people who mistake kindness for weakness. So 1 week before lockout, I made one final transfer, exactly $14,000. But not to my parents, to Kayla. Memo line, rent. Not because I forgave her, because I wanted to know what she would do if handed the same choice they expected from me. Would she sacrifice for family? Would she save the house? Would she step up the way they always demanded I should? No. She signed a lease in Charlotte 3 days later, packed her bags, left town, saved herself. Just like I knew she would. And when my mother found out the money had gone to Kayla instead of them, the screaming started all over again. Only this time, I did not come running. Then they did what desperate people always do when they lose control of the truth. They started lying to relatives, church friends, neighbors, telling everyone I abandoned them during a financial emergency, that I turned my back on my struggling family, that I watched them lose their home without caring. And for one brief second, the old version of me wanted to stay silent, to be dignified, to rise above it, to let people think what they wanted. But silence had protected them for years, not me. So I did something I had never done before. I told the truth. Publicly. I uploaded one statement to our private community Facebook group. Calm. Simple, time-stamped. At the top, I wrote one sentence. I will not carry a false story for people who built one out of me. Then I attached everything. The fake invoice showing it was printed before I moved back in. The signed acknowledgement of every dollar I had paid into that household, and selected audio clips from the dinner where they admitted the rent demand was fake and the pressure campaign was intentional. That was all it took. I did not rant. I did not insult them. I did not beg for sympathy. I simply documented them. And truth, when presented clearly enough, does not need much help. Within days, the story spread. My father lost subcontract referrals. My mother stepped down from her church budget committee. Kayla's new employer in Charlotte quietly rescinded the job offer after seeing her posts and hearing the rumors spreading online. And suddenly, all three of them understood something they should have learned long ago. Nobody had ruined them. They had ruined themselves. The calls came again after that. Apologies, crying, bargaining. My mother said, "Family doesn't do this to each other." I answered, "Exactly." My father said I humiliated them. I said, "No, I documented you." Kayla said she was sorry. I told her, "Sorry is not a time machine." And that was the end of it. Not because the pain disappeared, not because forgiveness magically happened, but because sometimes closure is not reconciliation. Sometimes closure is simply reaching the point where the people who hurt you can no longer rewrite what they did. And for the first time in my life, my family had nothing left to hide behind, accept the truth they created themselves. And if there is one thing this whole experience taught me, it is that blood does not excuse betrayal. For most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant staying quiet, helping when asked, giving when needed, forgiving without limits. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought family meant loyalty no matter the cost. But somewhere along the way, I learned a painful truth. Love that is built on guilt is not love. Support that is demanded instead of appreciated is not love. And a home where your worth is measured only by what you provide is not a home at all. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not fight harder. It is step back and let people face the consequences of how they treated you. Because protecting your peace is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. And refusing to finance your own humiliation does not make you cold. It makes you healthy. The truth is, some people will call you heartless the moment you stop letting them use you. Let them. Because the people who truly love you will never require your suffering to feel supported. And if someone only values you when you are sacrificing for them, then they never valued you to begin with. I did not walk away because I stopped loving my family. I walked away because I finally learned to love myself more. Sometimes the hardest lesson in life is realizing that love should never require your suffering. Family, friendship, loyalty, none of it means anything when it is built on guilt, manipulation, or sacrifice from only one side. Real love does not ask you to destroy yourself to prove your worth. And maturity, real maturity, is understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is self-respect. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop fixing what others keep breaking. To step back and let people face the consequences of their own choices. Because helping someone becomes dangerous the moment it requires you to lose yourself to save them. Sometimes healing does not come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from walking away and finally choosing yourself.